Have you ever stood outside someone's door, realizing one small knock could bring back years you thought you'd already buried? That was me, standing in a dim hallway that smelled faintly of dust and old paint. At 10:47 on a Thursday night. I'd been here before, a long time ago, when the air between us was still warm and familiar. Now, it just felt borrowed, like I was trespassing in a place that used to belong to another version of me. His name was still on the small brass plate beside the door. Hale. I don't know why I touched it, but I did the way you might touch a photograph you're not ready to look at. The metal was cold under my fingers, and for a moment I almost turned back. It would have been easy to walk away, to keep him as a memory instead of a person. I told myself I was here because I was leaving town, new job, new city, new life, that it felt wrong to go without saying something. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about goodbyes. It was about a silence that had been echoing too long, a weight that still pressed against the corners of my heart at night. Sometimes, closure isn't about doors closing, it's about learning to stand in front of them without trembling. The hallway was quiet, except for the hum of the elevator down the corridor. Someone's TV murmured faintly through a wall, voices blending into static. I'd imagined this moment so many times, but not like this. In my head, it was always storming outside, something cinematic. But life doesn't wait for drama. It gives you flickering lights, the faint smell of someone else's dinner, and a heartbeat you can't calm. I hadn't seen him in 3 years. I didn't know what version of him lived behind that door now. If he'd changed, if he'd grown older, if he'd forgiven me for the way things ended. Maybe I didn't need him to. Maybe I just wanted to know that we had both survived what we once couldn't fix. I adjusted the scarf around my neck, partly to keep warm, partly to buy time. My palms were sweating inside my coat pockets. I could almost hear the sound of my heartbeat in the silence, that uneven rhythm of fear and nostalgia tangled together. I remembered the last time I left this building. I was carrying a suitcase that felt heavier than it should have. I remember thinking how strange it was that you can pack your things, but not the person you used to be. You leave her behind, hoping someday she forgives you for walking away. I looked at the door one last time, the same wood, the same faint scratch near the handle, and drew in a slow breath. Maybe nothing waited on the other side. Maybe that was okay. Still, I raised my hand and let my knuckles rest against the wood, suspended in hesitation. It's such a small thing, knocking, but sometimes it's the bravest sound in the world. I didn't knock right away. My hand hovered there for what felt like forever, long enough for memory to take over. That hallway light buzzing above me seemed to hum with old ghosts. I could almost see us, years ago, coming home from work together, me balancing groceries, him pretending he wasn't exhausted. We'd laugh about something small, step into the apartment, close the door behind us, and just exist. Back then, the silence between us felt peaceful. Later, it would start to feel like distance wearing a disguise. People think relationships end in explosions, shouting, betrayal, some grand collapse. But ours ended like a slow exhale. Little things, almost invisible, slipping away until one day, I couldn't remember the last time he'd looked at me like he still saw me. He was a good man. He just grew quieter. And I think I did too. You start telling yourself that love changes, that comfort is enough, that silence means safety. But it doesn't. It just means no one's listening anymore. I remember the dinner's quiet, careful. He'd come home late, loosen his tie, and say, "Long day." I'd nod, pretending I understood the kind of tired he carried. We'd eat, watch something on TV, go to bed without talking much. It wasn't anger, it was absence. A kind of fading you can't measure until it's complete. Once, during a storm, the power went out. We lit candles, laughed awkwardly, and for a few minutes, it felt like we were rediscovering something. He told me about a memory from his childhood, how he used to count the seconds between lightning and thunder, because his mother said that's how you knew if the storm was getting closer. I remember thinking, I miss this version of him. That unguarded warmth, that small boy still hidden under the man. When the lights came back on, we both grew quiet again, like the darkness had been too honest. There were 100 moments like that, almost bridges we never crossed. A small touch I didn't return, a question I didn't ask. Love doesn't vanish overnight. It just forgets how to find you. When I finally told him I wanted to leave, he didn't shout or plead. He just nodded, eyes lowered, and said, "If that's what you need." I wanted him to fight for me. Maybe, but part of me knew that was selfish. We'd both run out of language long before that night. Now, standing there again after 3 years, I realized how strange it is. Coming back to the place where something once unraveled, everything looked smaller, the walls narrower, as if time had exhaled all the air we once shared. I still hadn't knocked. My chest felt tight, not from sadness, but from memory itself, that strange weight of remembering what once felt eternal and realizing how quietly it disappeared. I took a deep breath, not to calm myself, but to make space for whatever waited behind that door, or maybe just for the version of me who was finally ready to face it. Eventually, I knocked once, softly. It sounded so small, like a sound swallowed by memory. For a few seconds, nothing happened. I almost hoped he wouldn't answer. Maybe it would be easier that way, to walk away and let the silence keep its dignity. But then I heard movement from inside, the faint scrape of a chair, footsteps crossing the floor, the click of a light switch. When the door opened, I forgot how to breathe. He looked older, but not by much. His hair had thinned a little, his jawline softer. There was a calmness about him, not joy, not sadness, just stillness. He blinked when he saw me, as if trying to fit this version of me into his memory. Then, very quietly, he said, "Hey." "Hey," I said back. My voice didn't sound like mine. We just stood there for a moment, looking at each other. It wasn't dramatic. No rush of old feelings, no cinematic swell of nostalgia, just two people measuring the distance between what was and what is. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he stepped aside and said, "Come in." I hesitated, then did. The air inside was familiar, faint coffee and old wood. The layout had changed a little. The couch was new. The walls were painted a warmer color. But underneath all that, the place still felt like the one where we'd built our lives and quietly dismantled them. He gestured toward the table, the same one we'd once eaten countless quiet dinners at. I smiled faintly when I noticed the small dent still in the corner. "You never fixed it," I said. He glanced at it, then at me. I tried. It didn't feel right. We both laughed softly, carefully, as if afraid of breaking something delicate. He poured me tea without asking. It was chamomile, my favorite. I don't know if he remembered that or if it was just coincidence, but it made something small inside me ache. We talked, at first about nothing. The weather, my move, his new job. The kind of talk that fills space when the heart isn't ready to dig deeper. But even in that quiet exchange, there was a tenderness. Not love, not anymore, but recognition. He looked at me the way people look at a photograph, gently, as if afraid it might fade if they blink too long. I realized then that this, sitting at that table again, sharing tea in silence, was enough. We didn't need apologies or explanations. Sometimes, being seen without expectation is all the closure you get. When our eyes met, something inside me settled. I hadn't come here for him to miss me, or to say he was sorry. I'd come to see if I could stand in front of him and not feel broken. And for the first time, I didn't. The tea had gone lukewarm between us, but neither of us seemed to mind. He sat across from me, elbows resting lightly on the table, eyes tracing the steam that wasn't there anymore. I studied the lines on his face, the ones I used to know by heart. They deepened, but they didn't make him look older, just real. Like time had finally carved him into who he was supposed to be. He broke the silence first. "I heard you're leaving," he said. I nodded. "Next week, new job." I just needed a change. Good for you, he said softly. It wasn't forced or polite, he meant it. That simple kindness did something to me, not like a wound reopening, but like one finally breathing. For a while, neither of us spoke. There was no tension, no unfinished anger hiding in the quiet, just a calm awareness that we had both changed separately, maybe even for the better. You look well, I said. He smiled a small, tired smile. I'm trying then. After a pause, you too. You seem lighter. I laughed quietly. Maybe I finally learned how to put things down. He nodded, his gaze softening. I'm glad. That was the moment I realized how different this was from the conversations we used to have. Back then, everything between us had been heavy, every word carrying the weight of what wasn't being said. But now, it felt simple, honest, like the language of two people who had finally stopped needing to be right. After a while, I asked, "Are you happy?" I didn't know why I said it. Maybe out of old habit. Maybe because part of me still wanted to know I hadn't completely broken him. He tilted his head, thinking, "Some days," he said. "Not all, but I'm learning that maybe happiness isn't supposed to be permanent. Maybe it's just moments we notice." I smiled. "That sounds like you." He grinned faintly. "That's new. You used to say I was bad at noticing anything." I laughed again, a real laugh this time. I was wrong. It was strange how easy it felt, laughing with him again. Not like lovers, but like witnesses to the same old story, finally understanding its ending. He looked at me for a long moment, and there was warmth in his eyes. Not the kind that wants something back, but the kind that remembers and forgives. "You know," he said quietly, "I don't think either of us failed. We just ran out of the version of love we knew how to give." Something in me stilled. It was the kind of truth you don't argue with. "I think so too," I said. We didn't say anything after that. We didn't need to. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of understanding, of softness, of something that felt a lot like peace. When I finally stood up to leave, he didn't stop me. He didn't have to. We'd already said everything that mattered, just not in words. At the door, he said, "Take care of yourself." I smiled. "You too." And for the first time since I'd left him, I meant it without ache. When I stepped back into the hallway, the air felt different, cooler, lighter. Behind me, I heard the faint click of the door closing. It didn't sound like an ending, not this time, just a soft punctuation. The kind you put at the end of a sentence when you've finally said what needed saying. I stood there for a moment, looking at the door. It was the same door I'd closed years ago when I walked away, suitcase in hand, heart aching but resolute. Back then, I thought leaving was the only way to save what was left of me. Tonight, I realized leaving had simply been part of learning how to come back, differently, not to him, but to myself. The elevator hummed as it descended, that same slow groan it always had. I caught my reflection in the dull metal, the same face, maybe a little softer around the eyes. There was no sadness there, just something quieter, steadier. It's strange how we spend years trying to escape certain versions of ourselves, only to meet them again when we're finally ready to forgive them. The lobby was nearly empty. Outside, the city was hushed under a light fall of snow. It wasn't dramatic, just the kind of snow that drifts without sound, covering everything gently, equally. I stepped out into it, pulling my coat tighter. The cold touched my cheeks, but it didn't sting. It felt clean, honest. I started walking without knowing where I was going. My car was parked a block away, but I wasn't in a hurry. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for anything, just lets you be. I thought about the years between us, all the distance we'd filled with silence. I used to think silence meant emptiness. Now, I think it's just space, the kind that gives you room to breathe again. I remembered the small things, the mornings he made coffee too strong, the way he'd hum when he cooked, the sound of him turning the pages of a book too roughly. They used to bother me, Now, they felt like proof that it was real, that we'd lived something ordinary and imperfect and deeply human. People always talk about closure like it's a door you can shut and lock. But standing there, in that falling snow, I understood it differently. Closure isn't a door. It's a window you open to let the stale air out, to let something new in. It doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without wanting to rewrite it. I reached my car and stopped, resting my hand on the cold metal of the door. The streetlight above flickered softly, and for a moment, I just stood there, breathing in the quiet. I thought about the tea we shared, the calm in his eyes, the way he'd said, "Maybe happiness is just moments we notice." He was right. And maybe this stillness, this soft ache that didn't hurt anymore, was one of those moments.